view. Hilltop.
In a few moments, you will descend into the lower caverns. Please wait until you see the green light.
Dans quelques instants, vous allez descendre dans les grottes du bas. Merci de bien vouloir attendre le feu vert.
Never seen it so quiet here.
In wenigen
It's usually really busy.
werden Sie in die unteren Höhlen absteigen. Bitte warten Sie, bis Sie das grüne Licht sehen.
Oh, right. I'm good. It gets so deep down here.
There are 23 pairs of niches designed for candles carved into the walls of the tunnel. The monk walk is 35 meters, 145 feet long, and leads down into well over an acre of subterranean caverns and passages. The ballroom and incredible Monk's Walk were carved out of the solid rock in the early 1800s by Joseph Golding.
Oh yeah, that's not your entrance.
But that was used in World War II, where the caves used up to 600 people as air raid shelters. So that's been blocked off now, look.
Yeah, so they've gone somewhere else.
There are 23 pairs of niches designed for candles carved into the walls. 25 meters, 145 feet long, and leads down into well over an acre of subterranean caverns and passages.
Are they? Come to see old hairy Jack Abbey in the Smugglers' Caves. You are now standing 70 feet below ground. Did you know that? It's damn dark down here, isn't it? But that's exactly the sort of place where we smugglers like to hide our gin, tobacco, and other booty in the old days. I should know. I was here. Of course. I was alone then. But there were people down here hundreds of years before us smugglers. Oh, yeah. Like nobody knows who carved this weird figure. You'll find it in what they call the chapel, which happens to be the most haunted part of the caves. Now look over here. This was the original entrance. Back in 1786, some posh gent found a pair of old beggars living here. They said the caves only went back a few feet into the darkness, and told him to hop it. A few feet? I'm worried the smugglers was slipping them a few coins to keep out prying eyes. But more about smugglers later. Oh yes, In the early 1800s, some of the young rascals from the town used to bring their girls up here. You can imagine. So the mayor of Hastings decided that the cave should be closed and sealed. Until some years later, a gent called Joseph Golding was working in a garden up on the West Hill when the ground gave way and he nearly tumbled into the cavern. He was astounded by what he saw. And being a bit of a showman, he got permission to open the caves to the public. Lit with hundreds of candles, those people thought they was in fairyland. But old Golding didn't stop there. He cut pillars and domes out of the solid rock to create the ballroom, where they had regular dances. And look at this big chap behind you over the door. And there is another one opposite him, just round the corner. That's the military gentleman. St. Clement's Caves was the place to visit in Victorian times. Oh Lord, yes. Much later, during the World War, which started in 1939, the caves were used as an air raid shelter. Bombs were falling on the houses in Hastings, so people came down here to be safe. There were nearly 600 beds in the caves. Imagine. Then after the war, they had tours of the caves again. And tea dances. Oh, and the jazz evenings. What a racket. Enough to wake the dead. Which reminds me, you'll be wanting to discover more about the smugglers, whose spirits still roam around these caves. So off you go, and old Harry Jack will be around to tell you some more tales later. Come on, this way. Don't mind the ghosts. They're quite friendly. Most of them.
Center of the cabinet is the only known smuggler's accounts book, which belonged to George Smack Gillam, leader of the Little Common Gang, based near Bexhill. Most of the book contains legitimate lists of groceries, but hidden amongst the pages are records of another kind. The page you can see is an account of payments for various smuggling expeditions.
I wonder what they could afford this time. Of course, it don't matter much. Without paying the taxes and import duties in this country, there's money to be made on almost anything. More profitable than fishing, eh? As long as you doesn't get caught. Bring it ashore, boys. Here they are, unloading the ship from France. I wonder what they could afford this time. Of course, it don't matter much. Without paying the taxes and import duties in this country, there's money to be made on almost anything. More profitable than fishing, eh? As long as you doesn't get caught. Bring it ashore, boys.
If you wake at midnight and hear a horse's feet, don't go drawing back the blind or looking on the street. Leopard asks no questions, isn't told a lie. Watch the wall, my darling, as the gentlemen go by.
That's right, my old mates. Turn your face to the wall. So if they ask you, you didn't see nothing, did you? We're talking about smuggling, see? Bringing goods into the country illegal like. And there was a time from about 1700 until, say, 1830, when everyone was at it.
Diverse vessels running large quantities of tea and brandy on the coasts of Kent and Sussex.
The ruder classes of inhabitants are famous for smuggling, for which they lie exceeding convenient.
For many of us, it was the only way to survive. And why? Taxes, that's what. England was always at war during the 16 and 1700s, and the government needed money to pay for it all. So, what happened? Right, up went the taxes. By the 1700s, the tax was so high on many of the important things we all needed that most people considered buying smuggled goods without any tax to be the only answer.
In every place I went, they drank no tea but what was rum.
Many great men not only connive at smuggling, but practice it. You were not respectable then if you weren't a smuggler.
That's right. It wasn't just the poor folk.
Brandy for the parson, baccy for the clerk, laces for a lady, letters for a spy. Watch the wall, my darling, while the gentlemen go by.
That's what they called us, the gentlemen. And the gentlemen were sailing across to France and the Low Countries, fetching back huge quantities of gin in small barrels called tubs, and tea in oilskin bags.
Some of the finest seamen in the world.
But the smugglers on land were just as important as the seamen. We wouldn't have got far without the lookout men. They watched from the cliff tops and signalled out to the smuggling ships.
Danger! Do not run the goods tonight.
That means the preventive men were out and about to catch us. Or,
all clear.
Come ashore, lads. We're waiting to unload. And we had bodyguards called batmen.
Bah! Step no further.
They had big clubs or bats, which they used to discourage any nosy parties from interrupting our work.
A good team could run 500 tubs ashore in 20 minutes.
Then once the tubs were hauled up the cliff, often by derrick crane, the tubmen carried them off into the night. Smuggled goods were hidden everywhere. Houses had false floors, chimneys and cupboards. Even churches had vaults set aside for storage. Barns, windmills, and of course, caves were used. And we used to encourage spooky stories to frighten people away from the hiding places. At Hurstmonceux, 2 hours' ride from here, they said that if you heard the sound of the ghostly drummer, you'd better run. Them that saw him said he was 9 feet tall. The gin and brandy we brought ashore was almost neat alcohol, and we watered it down later. Some of us had a sip first, though.
The sailor told me he had drunk no less than 2 gallons. And he was in a stupor for nearly a week afterwards.
We smuggled it strong, because you didn't want to carry a whole load of water now, did you? But it had to be the correct strength before selling on. We used Lovey's beads, little glass balls, each marked with a different number. You just dropped the bead with the strength number you wanted into the spirit, then poured in water until it popped up to the top. See? You won't believe this, but apparently during the years 1781 to 1784, just 4 years, more than 1 3/4 million gallons of gin were landed in Kent and Sussex, and 2.5 million pounds of tea. That's big business. And the payment for a night's work was more than a farm labourer could earn in a week.
John Oates, that's 10 shillings, and you'll also get a pound of tea for a good haul.
Thank you, sir. I'll give it to Black-Eyed Nell for a favour.
That's a riding officer. In the early days, they only had riding officers trying to stop the smugglers. These were just local men paid to patrol the coast, but most of them could easily be bribed or intimidated.
Do dash a bottle of brandy in his face, and he's as blind as a beetle.
Of course, soldiers were sometimes called upon.
There are ways and means of taking off their edge, too.
And out at sea, the Board of Customs had revenue vessels which could usually be avoided. But in the mid-1700s, it all got out of hand.
Contempt for the law grew up under the smuggling system, and it was crowned with murder.
All along the south coast, bands of so-called smugglers sprang up and committed robberies, beatings and murders. Terrible harsh laws were brought in, and the gangs were eventually dispersed, jailed, or hanged. By the 1780s, they'd even brought in the Navy. Then,
England is at war with Napoleon.
smugglers turned to ferrying spies. Can you believe it? For both sides.
The English smugglers are likable people and have the courage and ability to do anything for money.
When Napoleon was finally defeated in 1815, thousands of English soldiers and seamen returned home with no money and no work. Many of them joined the newly formed Coast Blockade, which was created especially to crush the smuggling trade. There were violent and bloody battles, sometimes with up to 500 smugglers at a time. Taxes were eventually lowered, which meant there was little profit to be made from smuggling. The blockade was disbanded in 1831, but smuggling was on the way, and the Coast Guard took over. Of course, smuggling still goes on in your time, but it's a very different world. The romantic days of tub running on the Hastings beaches, they are gone forever.
And that asks no questions, isn't told no lie. Watch the wall, my darling, as the gentlemen go by.
And watch out for me as you explore the caves. I'll be seeing you.
Locals could earn as much as a farm labourer's weekly wage in just one night for carrying tubs from the seashore to various hiding places. With a team of these tubmen running in all directions across the countryside, the risk of being caught was not very great.
Get out of it.
Victorians call that strange car figure on the walls and clothes. Something like a saint. The chapel is because it grows so cold than the rest of the caves, and you feel the chill, and sometimes for no apparent reason, it will suddenly grow colder. Since the Smugglers Adventure opened in 1989, many inexplicable events have occurred at night when the caves are locked. Various items, such as heavy barrels, have been moved not just a few inches, but from one cavern to another, almost as though the smugglers from ancient times are still going about their ghostly business. Many people working alone in the caves have heard strange sounds, footsteps and comments.
That's me lying there, stabbed through the ribs by my own mates. The customs men gave you a deal of money for information. I was tempted, and look what happened. Serves me right. Rough justice in them days, eh? Dead men tell no tales. Two more tubs to come there, Darcy. I'll leave one up there for you. Remember the ghostly drummer of Herseman's song? But I think I hear him now. During the early 1700s, smuggling was so profitable that it was largely taken over by gangs who terrorized the locals. In one episode, a farm worker was whipped to death by the Hawker's gang, who quite wrongly accused him of stealing a bag of tea. Later for this crime, 12 of the gang were caught, convicted, and hanged.
It's a skeleton.
Let go of me! It's no use for you to say that! I didn't do nothing! You've been seen! What do you mean? I'm a smuggler. Oh, that'll be the worst! You! The dog I never smuggled in my life! I know you've been smuggling! I ain't done nothing wrong, I tell you. You can tell that to the court. I'm just a fisherman. A fisherman, don't! Leave go! Here! Get your hands off me! You have witnesses. You can search inside your toilet. Don't deny it. No! You have to come with us. There's no need to be so long. Not listening to you. You have witnesses. You can search inside your toilet. Don't deny it. No! You have to come with us. There's no need to be so long. Not listening to you.
That jumped me.
You have been convicted upon a very full and satisfactory evidence of deliberate murder, most justly ranked amongst the highest crimes human nature is capable. Christian charity obliges me to tell you that you already should. For you should be hanged by the neck until you shall get. have been convicted on a very moral and
Smugglers Adventure and it's pissing it down. Crazy.